Today on LTV with Kyle Racki, I'm going to be talking about customer success. This is part 2 and how customer success lowers churn and increases LTV. Customer success is a critical department within your company. It's the one that really makes sure that it's closely aligned with customers' needs and expectations, that your customers are having success using your software, and that over the long term, they stay as customers, they don't churn, they don't cancel, and in fact, they increase their spend over time. I covered a lot more about customer success basics and who you want to hire within your department and how you want to compensate them and what their key metrics are. I covered all this in another video, so feel free to check that out if you want to dig a little deeper. On this episode, what I'm going to be talking about more so is the actual day-to-day tactical stuff on how they onboard customers, how they make sure they retain them, and then expand them over time. So the first step that your customer success team takes when a new customer signs on is to make sure that they get onboarded. And onboarded is a term that can cover a lot of ground. But essentially what it does is it makes sure that your customer is set up and fully rolling out the software, making sure that they're getting initial value and they're starting to achieve the goals and they're starting to solve whatever challenges they had. The whole reason why they signed up for the software, they should begin realizing that value. And that means that they've been onboarded. So what your CS team will need to do is work to uncover what your activation metrics are. So what is it that a customer does in the software that indicates that they're getting value from it? So at Proposify, for example, we know our customers are getting value if they're sending out proposals and they're winning them. And so that's something that we look at very carefully. If a customer has signed on and after a certain amount of time, they haven't sent a proposal or they haven't won a proposal, then we know it's time to step in and just try to understand why is it that they're not using it and how can we help them that way. A big part of onboarding is training, and some SaaS companies actually charge for training. I know HubSpot does. There's many others who have required paid onboarding when you sign on. So if you buy a HubSpot account, you're not just paying your subscription. Your subscription bill isn't just for the software, but you also have to pay a one-time fee to get onboarded. And I actually had the opportunity recently to sit down with the Chief Strategy Officer, Brad Coffey at HubSpot, and he shared some interesting perspectives from HubSpot and how that's helped them. One thing that he told me was that customers actually appreciate being able to pay a one-time fee to get onboarded, because their biggest fear with rolling something like HubSpot out is that they're not going to, it's not going to be successful. They're going to spend all this time and all this money. It's not going to work for them. So they feel better about buying the onboarding service because it means somebody's going to be there with them every step of the way, helping them out. And so depending on how much training your product takes, will just dictate how much you want to charge, or if you want to charge at all for onboarding. For enterprise SaaS, professional services is often a required part of using the software because every install of the software is completely customized to your enterprise. And that's why they typically charge in the hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars for enterprise SaaS, is because it requires so much customization, and they charge accordingly for that. As a general rule, you want to make sure that you're charging at a cost for your services, especially on the lower end. So if you're selling to smaller businesses, you probably don't want to make the service, the revenue that you get from services, as one of your key revenue drivers. You want to charge just enough so that you're covering some of those internal costs, but really the net way of gauging whether or not your SaaS company is successful is the recurring revenue. It's the subscription revenue. It's not the one-time services. So I've covered a lot of onboarding because it's so important, because typically once your customers are onboarded and getting value out of your software, they're much less likely to cancel. If you want to use the farming analogy, when a young sapling is still fresh and new, its chances of dying is quite high. But essentially, once it starts growing into a fruitful tree, its chances of dying are much less likely. So it's kind of the same with your accounts. If you get them properly onboarded, the chance of them canceling is very low. And what that does for you as a business is it lowers your churn, which increases your lifetime value. So for example, if your customer is paying you $10,000 a year to use your software, but they cancel within the first year or just after the first year, then that's as much value as you're ever going to receive from that account. But if you put a lot of work into getting them onboarded and they end up staying with you for 10 years, well, then their lifetime value is $100,000. So it makes a massive difference. And then take into account the idea of expansion revenue. So if they stay with you for 10 years, but every year they double their spend because they keep using more of it and getting more people in their company using it, then that individual customer has such a high lifetime value. It just makes sense to invest your customer success team into them. And conversely, they'll spend much less time with those customers as time goes on because they don't need to be onboarded and trained constantly. So let's assume your customer success team has successfully onboarded a customer. They're just going to stay forever. Well, you can actually run into issues where accounts become less healthy over time. And so if you actually look at customer success software, that's the primary function of it is to measure the health of customers. And you can program it to look at whatever factors are important for your business. So if it's important in our case that customers are sending out proposals and winning them, then we would make sure that that becomes a factor in telling us whether or not a customer is healthy. And so what you can actually do is you can set it up so that the health score reflects all of those key activities within an account. So what that ends up doing is it makes it easy for your customer success team to log in every day and see a list of accounts that are at a high risk of churning, that maybe need some love, they need somebody to reach out. For example, if there are people on their team have been sending a lot of support tickets into support and not getting responded to, or if there's a high level of frustration, then that's obviously a high risk of churn. That's somewhere where you want to make sure you get on a call with the account owner and make sure that you're doing everything you can be to make sure that whatever issues they're having are getting solved. So red flag metrics are something you would want to think about for your software. So what are some things that a customer does or doesn't do that throws up a red flag and says this account has a high risk of churn, we need to get somebody reaching out to them? The last thing that I want to cover is how your CS team handles renewals. So if you sell a product that has an annual fee, then at the end of every year, you're going to somebody's going to want to reach out and make sure that that customer plans to continue renewing their account and paying the fee for the next year. And a lot of SaaS companies do this differently. Some companies, I know HubSpot has renewal managers, and they're actually separate people who will call a customer a month or 2 or 3 months before their renewal to make sure that they're planning on renewing and maybe looking for some upsell opportunities. I think there's pros and cons to this approach. One of the cons being maybe there's too many people touching that account. Maybe, if your customer has their CSM and somebody on support and somebody on training and the sales rep who closed them and now a renewals manager, maybe it's just going through too many hands. On the other hand, you do get some benefit by having them be different people, because maybe you don't want your CSM to handle renewals and upsells just so that they can stay as a trusted advisor for the client, and the client never feels like their CSM is trying to upsell them. I think there's a lot of different ways to take this. I know what we do at Proposify is we have the CSM do the upsells. And I think the reason we can do that is because we take the approach that upselling an account is never looking to swindle the company out of money. It's really just about looking for opportunities where, okay, we've been building a lot of value for you. Do you plan to bring it to different departments? Is there a feature on another plan that's maybe a little higher than your existing one that you could get a lot of value of? So it's all about how can we create value for the client and get compensated accordingly. It's not about looking to just sell them more stuff because. So from a renewal standpoint, one thing that you may want to have your customers or your CSMs doing is looking at regular business reviews. Some people call it quarterly business reviews. If you have a very high-priced enterprise product, you may want to look at doing it quarterly. I've also heard it called executive business reviews, which don't necessarily need to be quarterly. But essentially, it's a scheduled regular call for your customers to make sure your CSM is reviewing how they've been using it, what kind of value they're getting out of it, and often this creates upsell opportunities. So you don't have to just have them upsell on a renewal call. You can also have them just periodically doing check-in calls to deliver a report to show them what the software's actually been doing to help the customer. So if you're building a customer success team, I hope some of these tactics and strategies can help you as you roll them out. I know it took me a lot of reading and talking to other people to try to figure out how to do these things when I took over running the department for a couple of months. And so I hope that it provides value to you and you try them out for your own CS team. As always, thanks for watching or listening to this, and I'll talk to you next time.
This episode of Lifetime Value is brought to you by Proposify. Proposify improves sales productivity so your team spends less time creating proposals and more time selling. Start your free trial at proposify.com and be sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss a single episode.